What is happening, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Flex Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Raybon of the Action Network, and this is our tight end fantasy preview episode for 2023. Here to break it down with me, fresh off his gambly wins, one of the top rankers in the game, Sean Kerner. Sean, what's going on?
Whew, man, just recovering from our very fun but very tiring New York trip. It was good to see everybody, but yeah, still recovering. How about you?
Yeah, man, I'm chilling. It was a long trip, but fittingly, you and I both won a Gambly, which is, I guess, our company
Yes.
version of the SBs or whatever. But we both won one for what was it? Best performance coming off a bender.
Yeah, I don't know
So
why they had to add the bender part. I mean, that was an element that may be added to it, but I thought it was just a good show overall. Like, why did the bender have to be included in that?
Yeah, and for those that don't know, this is like Bet What Happens live show at halftime of the Bucks Cowboys Monday Night Playoff game. So
And I think by the end of that, you established Tom Brady was 70 years old.
yeah, I think he was 80 years old with the yips.
Oh, okay, yeah, because he started off 50 and then he gradually you added 10 years.
Yeah, I mean
Every
Tom Brady
minute.
that he literally aged out of the league right there. Like we're not seeing him play again, right? So
Yeah, that was a rough game. That was a game with all the missed extra points too, right?
Yeah. Brett Maher and Tom Brady.
Oh my God. And then Zeke, you were explaining that play to me. Still one of the funniest plays of all time, but Zeke just getting trucked.
No, wasn't that was that game, or was that was the next week? Zeke getting trucked was the Niners, because that was the Cowboys won the Bucks game, remember?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So Zeke getting trucked was the Niners game, but yeah, the explanation was that they were hoping to lateral to him. They couldn't throw to him legally, and they would have the whole O-line to block for him, but the Niners figured it out and just trucked him. But we digress. We're going to talk about tight ends on this episode. We're going to go through the top 12 in ADP in best ball over the last couple of weeks. Also talk about any guys outside the top 12 that we're targeting that we think are good values and have a chance to finish top 12 for this season. So without further ado, Travis Kelce, I mean, there's a situation. It's going to happen one of these years. Some innocent person is going to pick their first round pick, look at all the wide receivers and running backs available and even quarterbacks, and they're going to say, you know what? Positional scarcity tells me to go draft Travis Kelce here. And one of these years, he's not going to pay off this draft pick. Is it going to be this year for Kelce, who has shown no slowdown to date?
Yeah, no, I'm not betting against him this year. In fact, it was a couple years ago. I did feel that by now we would see either Mark Andrews or maybe even Kyle Pitts possibly overtake Kelce as the tight end one, but that's just not the case because, Kelce has shown no signs of slowing down. I mean, he set career highs last year in his age 33 season for targets, catches, and touchdowns. Granted, they play an extra game now, but either way, he's not showing signs of slowing down. So there's just a big gap still between him and the rest of the position. If you were to think of all other positions, he has the best odds, clearly, to be the top scorer at the position, and it's usually by a wide margin. I think last year he was averaging 6 more points per game in PPR than the second ranked tight end. So it's just a massive edge to have him on your team. So if you were to take him first overall, wouldn't be the craziest thing ever. I think, fifth overall, I think makes a ton of sense. But if he's sitting there and I have pick 5, I'm absolutely taking him still.
Yeah, I usually take him starting with about pick 5, pick 6, depending on the format. We'll talk wide receivers in the next episode, so look out for that. But I still think there's a couple wide receivers. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase definitely should be in that conversation. McCaffrey, Eckler, for me in that conversation. Some people have Eckler a lot lower, but there's a couple of guys that I would put right up there because I think they have a great chance at finishing number 1 at one of those flex positions. But yes, no issue with taking Kelce. And again, you look at because it's not just the volume stats, which just is a testament to the fact that this guy never misses games, but
knock on wood.
Right. The underlying metrics, the targets per route, 25%, 2.2 yards per route. Those are excellent numbers and higher than some of the other years in the recent past where he's been even younger and with Patrick Mahomes. So there's just nothing to suggest outside of him being, 12 months older that we're going to see any type of change. Patrick Mahomes is going to have to rely on him, just as much as ever. You're never going to see any of those other receivers, I think, be a Tyreek Hill-like presence in this Chief offense, at least at this point. So, I'm fine with taking Kelce there. It's going to burn somebody one year. I don't think it's going to be this year.
Yeah, and I said that even though maybe his physical traits might decline this year, the fact that he is paired with Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the league, who's still ascending. I mean, you could say Patrick Mahomes hasn't even peaked yet. I think that could help offset any potential decline from Kelce. It's just that Mahomes himself is actually still ascending.
Yeah, and Kelce is like the Patrick Mahomes of tight end. So
yeah,
it's a good combination. Mark Andrews is the number 2 tight end, and he usually goes, in the third round at this point. There were times, I think last year, where he was going in the second round. Usually see him go in the third round now, middle of the third. For Andrews, another guy, the underlying metrics last year were fine. His targets per route rate actually increased from 24 to 25%. It was just the Ravens really weren't as pass heavy, especially with Huntley having to start games for Lamar. So where are you pegging Andrews? We know he has the upside, but he came off a little bit of a disappointing season. Are you kind of splitting the difference? Are you bullish on him? Are you bearish on him? What are you doing with Mr. Andrews?
I would say I'm neutral because, like you mentioned, he is coming off a disappointing season. A lot of that had to do with he didn't score a touchdown after week 6. And you could blame that. He had some shoulder and knee injuries where, he probably wasn't 100% after that. And he was without Lamar Jackson for the final 6 games. And oftentimes I would joke with you, like, usually when Tyler Huntley was under center, Mark Andrews would ball out even more. But that wasn't the case last year. His production did drop off with Huntley in the lineup. So I think with, Lamar back, Andrews, close to 100% health heading in the season, that should help. The one thing that does concern me, though, is, his target share will certainly go down just because Rashad Bateman's back, Odell Beckham and Zay Flowers are now in the mix. But that could be offset with just the fact that the Ravens will probably throw a lot more with Todd Monken as offensive coordinator. So I think that kind of negates itself a bit. So I still have Mark Andrews in tier 2 all by himself, not even close to Kelce, but also, comfortably ahead of a guy like TJ Hockenson. So I still think Andrews should be the second tight end off the board, and where he's going, I think that's a fair price for him.
Yeah. And a lot of tight ends, the fantasy relevant ones, there's a couple guys that have talent that we're talking about now: Kelce, Andrews, Kittle, Hockenson. But routes and just volume still play a big factor because a lot of these guys, they don't have the same upside as wide receivers. So it really comes down to getting enough volume. And you look at Andrews last year, and his routes per game, like raw routes per game, were around 29, whereas the year before they were at 37. So he does have some room to play with if the Ravens just kind of go back to an average clip of throwing the ball, which, as you mentioned, I think they will with Todd Monken here, because the one thing they're talking about, they're probably going to use the fullback less. That in itself is going to just open the offense up. And I think that's just kind of the goal, open the offense up. Lamar's never really had a truly wide open offense, even in years his pass attempts have been up a little, which was really just that 2021 season, to be honest. So, I think Mark Andrews has that same upside that, there are times where we were, debating how close is Andrews to Travis Kelce. I think he still has that upside. And this year, he actually has a good chance of hitting it because he's still young, still in his prime. But a lot of people are going to look at all these receivers and think he's going to get knocked for that and like he's going to get squeezed. But like I say, the top guys in an offense, they usually kind of their usage kind of stays similar as far as on a per route basis. So I think all those guys, while it's going to be a increased supporting cast and like a better supporting cast, I think all those guys are still going to be fighting for scraps behind Andrews, who's going to get targeted 20-25% of the routes he runs, which is very good for a tight end. All right, Hockenson, what do you think of Hockenson? That's always been your boy. He's kind of you mentioned Andrews kind of in a tier by himself, so Hawkinson's technically a tier 3 guy. I agree with that. I do have him number 3. I mean, there's a lot of upside here, right? Because he could essentially be their number 2 target. I mean, he was for even last year. So, what are you doing with TJ here in this tight end 3 range middle? Usually around the 5th round, he goes off the board.
Yeah, I think he's worth it. He is my tight end 3. He was the tight end 3 in his 10 games with the Vikings last year. And it was crazy. His underlying metrics looked very similar to Travis Kelce in those 10 games with the Vikings. He was targeted on 24% of his routes. Kelce was 25% last year. Hockenson averaged 8.6 targets a game. Kelce 8.9. Both had an ADOT of 7.7. So, being compared to the greatest tight end in fantasy isn't bad. So I think the underlying metrics certainly support him, maintaining this top 3 status. And he's going to get even more chemistry with Kirk Cousins and the offense as a whole by having a full offseason with the new team. Like it's crazy how productive he was being traded, mid-season. We've seen that a lot more lately, but it's always fascinating how a player can just, become so involved in the offense, learn the playbook right away. But I think having a full off season should help even more. And, let's face it, he's always had the talent to be a top, 5, top 3 tight end. And he finally landed in a spot where, it's maximizing that. And I think being in this Vikings offense, he certainly, warrants being taken as a 3rd tight end off the board.
Yeah. And I think the reason is, you just kind of hit on it. Like he's got another year in this offense. And I think what really held him back from doing even better last year was he only scored 6 touchdowns, 3 with the Vikings, 3 with the Lions. I think there is an outlier TD season in his range of outcomes because remember, Thielen, he had 30 touchdowns over these last 3 seasons, and he's now in Carolina. So there's kind of an opening. Obviously, Jefferson is going to get his, but there is an opening for somebody to step up on the Vikings and be a double-digit touchdown guy. Their defense, it should be better than last year just because of Brian Flores, but, they've had somewhat of an exodus of talent just because they've been cap strapped. So could see another high volume year for Hockenson. But if he goes from 6 touchdowns, to like 12, or even 10, that's a big difference. And I think that's firmly within his range of outcomes. So that's why I like Hockenson, because I do think he has that upside to challenge Kelce, as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, and just those really nowhere you can really poke holes in his game. And I would say obviously the rest of the position you can, but certainly the next 3 tight ends, they're, they all kind of have a lower floor scenario. I just don't see that with Hockenson. I just think he has an ideal high ceiling, high floor range of outcomes. So he's clearly my tight end 3.
Yeah. And I think the reason is I know I've been worried about George Kittle. It sounds like you're kind of there, or at least, the fact that, because I think, going back even to last year, a guy like Hockenson over a guy like George Kittle, people would have kind of done a double take. But, the raw numbers, the per game numbers, 4 catches, 51 yards, those are his lowest since his rookie year in 2017. He bailed himself out fantasy wise. He bailed us out with 11 touchdowns in 15 games. And as you like to point out, he was the number 1 tight end in fantasy with Brock Purdy. But I still am worried because the underlying metrics and the targets per route specifically, 31, 28, 24, 18% last 4 years. If he doesn't get the touchdowns, it's an entirely different player. And, it just might need to be that with McCaffrey here now. So what do you think? How are you kind of distributing the targets here, and does Kittle take a hit, do you think, this year with McCaffrey now there for a full year?
Yeah, I think he does take a hit with McCaffrey there for a full year. And just, looking back at last season, it was really a tale of 2 halves of the season. So I don't like to look at his full season metrics. He missed the first 2 games, then had a slow start. But, like you mentioned, he was the tight end 1 over the final 6 games of the season, which also happened to be the 6 games that Brock Purdy was under center. So I think that's great news for Kittle heading into this season, because it looks like Purdy is going to be the quarterback when healthy. And I think as of now, they're optimistic he'll be ready for week 1. So I think that's the good news for Kittle. But, looking at that 6-game stretch, 3 of those games, Deebo Samuel's out of the lineup, which is going to, have a impact on Kittle. But just this offense, there's so many mouths to feed now with Christian McCaffrey there. Debo Samuel. I mean, Brandon Ayuk is legit in his own right. So I think just Kittle carries a lower weekly floor than all the other, top 5 tight ends this year, because, there's going to be some weeks where he's the odd man out. So I think he's going to be very volatile. He's going to have those really big games, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns, and, a dud, 2 catches for 20 yards. So I think you just have to know that when you draft him. And that's probably what makes him better, I would say, in best ball formats, just that volatility. But yeah, I kind of agree. Like, being the tight end 4, I just don't think he provides that consistency. And not that I'm really knocking him here, but he has, missed a lot of time in the past due to injuries, sometimes soft tissue. So he just does carry like a lower floor than you'd want from a tight end 4. So that's why I'm usually not targeting him in this range.
Yeah, I think the ceiling in terms of the touchdowns he hit last year with the help of Purdy. But yeah, I'm hoping that people overrate those last 6 games and the fact that it's with Brock Purdy, who I do have a lot of respect for as a quarterback. I think he showed out well last year, but we know to trust the underlying metrics. Like, targets per route is a sticky metric, especially when you run as many routes as Kittle. So the fact that goes from 24% to 18%, even with that big finish, I think should worry us a little. And it makes a lot of sense because you mentioned the guys, Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey. All 3 of those guys are legitimate guys that will get targeted 20-25% of their routes. You can only have, you can only have so many of those guys on one team before guys start getting squeezed. And it was Kittle last year, and he's such an explosive guy over that middle of that field that a lot of times, he ends up being used as a decoy, and then he's also a pretty good blocker. So he's still banging around a lot in the run game. He'll even pass block more than you would expect, maybe for a guy of his stature. But that he's a guy I'm worried about. I feel a lot better about Hockenson's floor because it's still early enough. I say you can't lose your draft in the first 5-6 rounds. You don't want to lose it. You can't win it, but you don't want to lose it. Kittle's kind of towing that line because I do think there's a drop off at wide receiver earlier and earlier as the market, kind of sharpens up to the fact that you need, 3 to 4 quality wide receivers on your team now, just the way the league is and the way rules are. So I think, passing up on a potential wide receiver, 2 or 3 for Kittle, I think is pretty risky this year.
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Goedert, he was very consistent last year. Top 13 finish all but 2 games that he played. He played in 12, but he's another guy. I mean, you just wonder, are there going to be enough pass attempts to go around? And especially now with a guy like DeAndre Swift in the mix, he's likely going to be more involved in the pass game than was a player like Miles Sanders last year. So what are you doing with Goedert, who is the tight end 5, but he's kind of in this like purgatory, in my opinion, on the board.
Yeah, I've always said he had top 5 upside without Zach Ertz. So it wasn't a shock in the first season post Zach Ertz that he finished, as the tight end 5. So he was the tight end 5 weeks 1 through 10 before missing the next 5 games due to injury. So when healthy was the tight end 5. However, I do think that's probably his ceiling because you touched on it. They already have AJ Brown, Devonta Smith there. They're going to command their targets in a run heavy offense. But now we also have, high volume pass catching back and DeAndre Swift, who I think would eat into Goddard's targets specifically. So you mentioned he was consistent. That might, make him a little bit more inconsistent, which would be a shame. So I have him in the same tier as Darren Waller and Kyle Pitts. And usually Goddard's the first one taken from that tier. And I always say I don't like taking the first guy drafted from a tier. So, like I said, I think tight end 5 sounds about right, but that's closer to his ceiling. So I'm not getting him as much this season. And this is kind of where the position kind of drops off. Like I was mentioning, after the top 3, it kind of opens up a bit. And just where Goedert is going, I'm just not getting him too much.
Yeah, I do have him closer to Kittle, just because you look at, for example, Goddard's per game numbers last year were better than Kittle. He had 4.6 catches per game for about 59 yards. Now, the issue with Goedert was, unlike Kittle, who had 11 scores, Goedert had only 3. So there is some upside there. but he's never been a big touchdown guy. His career high is actually 5 touchdowns. But we said that about Kittle too. His career high prior to the 11 was 6 touchdowns. So I do think there's that kind of upside to where, the touchdowns get redistributed and Goedert can go from 3 to 10. So I kind of still put him in that Kittle range because I think the per game numbers are going to be a little bit similar. But Kittle still has more talent, and that's therefore I think more high end upside. But I don't actually have too much differentiation between those two guys. And then I think tight end 6 is pretty polarizing. It's Darren Waller. Some places it's Kyle Pitts, but I started the offseason pretty low on Waller. I think I've kind of come around a little bit, and I think we've got word now, Saquon Barkley, what exactly is going to happen with him. His availability is a bit in question because of, the offer is not where he wants it to be. So that could make the Giants maybe a little more pass heavy, and it takes a pass catcher running back out of the equation if he misses any time. So what do you think about Waller here going to the New York Giants for a 3rd round pick?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good move for Waller. That the Giants don't have as many, passing yards or touchdowns to go around as the Raiders, but he should see his 18% targets per route run rate go up, not having to play alongside Devontae Adams. And, one of the puzzling things of projecting the Giants is, which one of their 100 wide receivers are going to be on the field. But the good news is they can only have 3 wide receivers at most on the field at the same time. So either way, I think Waller will likely be, Daniel Jones' top target this year. So, I think that's going to give him a high floor and a high ceiling. So I kind of like him at tight end 6. The only concern with Waller at this point is, he's turning 31 and, the past few seasons, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So I think, unfortunately, he has earned the injury prone label just because he hasn't been able to play through injuries that, other guys have played through, which is a concern. So I have him, in the same tier as Goedert and Pitts. And I typically like to get whoever falls at the bottom of that tier, and sometimes it's Waller, sometimes it's Pitts. But I do think that that's kind of, the 3rd tier at tight end. And after that, if I'm in a redraft league, I'd be considering just, streaming the position or getting Chig a bit later on. So it's a critical part in my draft, whether it's Waller or Pitts that makes it that far. Because once both are off the board, I typically wait until the later rounds to grab a tight end. So, I like Waller, but he has to stay healthy and just, he hasn't proven that the past few years.
Yeah, there's a wide range of outcomes, the injury thing, the age, the new offense in general, just sometimes that doesn't always work out for pass catchers. It's not, Daniel Jones obviously earned his contract, but he's not elite. So I think the floor is pretty low. It's another spot where I get it, if you want to take that shot, and depending on your draft strategy, I think, these guys that we're talking about now, Kittle, Goedert, Waller, Pitts, if I'm going more of a 0 running back strategy, that's where I think they come into play because, if you're going with, let's say, 4 wide receivers and a tight end in the first 5 rounds or, 5 in the first 6, I think you do want to kind of take a shot at these guys in this next tier that could theoretically get up to that, top tier 2, tier 1.5, 1B, whatever you call it, in terms of tight end production. That's certainly what these guys have in a range of outcomes. But if you're kind of drafting a little more traditionally, and you're only taking your wide receiver 2 or 3 in these spots, I don't know if I would pass on wide receiver 2 or 3 options. Even a solid flex option at one of those running back or wide receiver for a guy like a Darren Waller, who I still think the floor is pretty low.
So when it comes to his usage in this offense, last year he had an ADOT of 13.7. He was more of a deep threat, made him a lot more volatile. Do you think, the Giants want to use him more downfield, or is he going to see more underneath targets, more volume? Like, how do you think they're going to use him? Because that's kind of the thing they've been lacking, right? Is more of a deep threat. And they have all these slot receivers. So is he going to be getting easy passes over the middle, or is that going to push him to like a more like a Kyle Pitts kind of role?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah, really? Okay.
Yeah,
because that would be a concern then.
Yeah, because I mean, that's going to naturally lead to a little more volatility. It's going to lead to more upside too. But again, at this point in the draft, and with him, you're starting to get to the 6th round, maybe into the 7th. So it's not, you can start to take some risks there when you're talking about Waller anyway. But yeah, Slayton obviously is a deep ball guy. Looks like he's going to be in the mix. But you do still have, Wan'Dale Robinson coming back at some point. Shepard's still on the team. If he plays well, I don't think they, I don't think they cut him either. And then Jalen Hyatt's like a wild card too. But yeah, you have a lot of slot receivers. I don't know if Waller gets like the TJ Hockenson treatment where he averaged like 6 yards a target. He was just getting peppered with targets. So
exactly.
There is a low floor, but at the same time, he could be their wide receiver 1. And there's always a high ceiling and being that top target. He could go back to being a target high, getting targeted closer to a quarter of his routes like he was the last couple years before 2022. Kyle Pitts is the tight end 7, so Waller's passed him in some ADPs. Really, his issue with last year was he didn't get many catchable targets, only 52% according to PFF. That's down from 66% the year before. So I think he has some upside to bounce back. What do you think of Pitts heading into year 3?
Yeah, no, I think, look, he's still a generational talent. Still 22 years old, has all the upside. Just the reason he's been a disappointment is just, due to the scheme, injuries, more things outside of his control. But last season, he saw a massive 26.5%, target rate. So that's great. But like you mentioned, he only caught 50% of the targets because unfortunately they're more downfield, at an ADOT of 13.7, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It depends who your quarterbacks are. But like you said, not many of them are catchable. So that's not a good combo. And unfortunately, we haven't really seen him play in a regular season game with Desmond Ridder yet. And Desmond Ridder had the 4th worst catchable ball rate on passes 20 plus yards downfield. So again, not a good sign just based on how they're using Pitts. But he could break out this year, especially if they start peppering him with more underneath targets, getting him, some easy catches. I think that'll help. So we need them to kind of, change the scheme around a little bit. But I do think he's going at a point now where I think it is worth, taking a flyer on, especially since, he's at the end of this tier. Like I said, I kind of like to have a tight end once this tier is off the board. If not, I'll take a guy later on, no problem. But I think that he still has that top 5 upside. Could happen this year. So I think getting him at tight end 7 right now is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I think, there's only so many guys with the talent that he has. Now, we know the Falcons are probably going to be a run-heavy team, but that's kind of the issue with all these tight ends. I mean, Kittle's on a run-heavy team. Goedert, even the Eagles, they still trend run-heavy. The Giants, there's not as many attempts to go around either. I don't know if we would call them run-heavy, but they're definitely kind of in that category more than the opposite. And Pitts as well is in that kind of category. So all of these guys have this upside to kind of get to that, that tier right after Kelce. Or I mean, Pitts has the talent to get to Kelce's tier, but the volume probably not going to be there with the Falcons. But there is some room to grow in the touchdown department. He's only had 3 in his first 2 years in the league. So yeah, I think, again, it really depends on your draft strategy and how much risk you really want to take on a tight end if you don't get one of the top ones. I prefer to do it a lot more when I'm kind of, going 0 RB and I'm just trying to, get as much pass catching upside as possible early on. And I'm just going to take whichever running backs fall. I'm usually a lot more willing to do it, but Pitts is dropping in ADP. And you mentioned like the last guy in a tier, is it Pitts or do these guys in the next tier? Like does Evan Engram, like how close is Evan Engram, for example, who's going as a tight end 8? How close do you put him to the tier of, Kittle, Goedert, Waller, Pitts that we just talked about?
Honestly, he's probably closer than people think. I do like Evan Engram. Unfortunately, this is always just the time where I'm punting a tight end. And by the way, wouldn't it just be easier if you take Travis Kelce with the 5th pick overall? I mean, my God, That's what one of the blessings of taking Kelce 5th overall is just not having to deal with this shit. So I do like Evan Engram, and he was the tight end too from weeks 13 through 18 last year. And I always mention, if you watch those games, he absolutely looked like it too. He had the second most yards after the catch last season. And sometimes that can be lucky, but if you look at next gen stats, they have expected yards after the catch, and he had the third highest. So I think that had just to do with the scheme. They were opening him up for plenty of yards after the catch. Not too surprising, because Doug Peterson has always had tight end friendly schemes. So I love the situation Engram is in. Maybe it took him half season to get up to speed in it, but he and Trevor Lawrence are on the same page. The only really concern I have is, you're injecting a pretty good wide receiver and Calvin Ridley into this offense. So I think he is going to take away some of the target share from Engram. But so, tight end 8, that's a fair price for him. I don't know how much more upside he provides in this offense with Calvin Ridley there. But again, if you wait at tight end, you get Evan Engram at tight end 8. I think that's fair. And to be honest, I only have him, 5 points lower than like a Dallas Goedert, and you can get him much later. So that's kind of what I was saying is I'm not really reaching at Goedert at tight end 5. That's closer to ceiling when you can get Evan Engram way later. And I only have him projected for 5 fewer points this season. So, he's definitely, smack dab in that mid tight end 1 range of outcomes. So I actually do like Evan Engram this year.
Yeah. And I think his upside is going to come from not necessarily being any more efficient or, because he balled out last year, but I think it's going to come from the fact that the Jaguars probably have a lot more volume upside than a lot of those other guys. Trevor Lawrence averaged about 34 to 35 pass attempts his first 2 years in the league, but that, especially with Calvin Ridley there, Lawrence could be one of those guys that's in that 38 to 40 range. And that's going to be a positive for Engram. And the Jaguars, they really didn't sub out. They had their kind of top guys on the field. It was Engram. It was the top 3 receivers. You figure that will happen again. So if Engram's routes go up, the raw numbers will follow. So he's kind of he's a little more dependent, I think, something like that. So yeah, tight end 8 is fair for him, but yeah, still not a spot where I'm loving the value here, because I think every time you go down another spot, you're like, there's just not as much separation. Yeah. The number 9 tight end is Pat Freiermuth. He did make jumps from his first to second year, targeted further downfield. The targets per route went from about 20 to 22%. The yards per route from about 1.3 to 1.7. So we saw the jumps, but I think he's kind of got the opposite problem of Engram, where similar kind of underlying metrics, but the Steelers, Matt Canada came out and said that they don't want me to open the offense up. Like, we want to just be a defensive first team. So what do you think of Freiermuth here at tight end 9?
Yeah, that's honestly, again, probably closer to his ceiling. Now he probably should be a top 10 tight end off the board. He's very talented. He's still only 24, entering year 3. I was always saying he was getting overlooked in the 2021 draft just because Kyle Pitts stole the spotlight. If Kyle Pitts wasn't in this class, Pat would have been the top tight end drafted, would have had a lot more hype. Thought he was really good. And George Pickens gets a ton of hype, rightfully so, heading into year 2. But Freiermuth is technically the number 2 target in this offense. And there were some weird stretches last year where Pat's routes run rate dipped like in the mid 50s. They were using him very weird. I don't think Matt Canada's a very good coordinator, so I was disappointed that he's staying there. But all other games, he had very solid underlying metrics. He's typically averaging a 75 to 80% routes run rate, saw a 23% target rate, but unfortunately there just weren't many yards or touchdowns to go around. So he will benefit if Kenny Pickett can make a significant year 2 leap. So if you think that's going to happen, you should be drafting Pat Freiermuth, but that's not a guarantee. So I think tight end 9 is fair. And I don't think Darnell Washington will have too much of an impact year 1, but there's still a chance. So I think he could kind of represent Pat's floor. If they start getting Darnell Washington 30% routes a game, that could eat into Pat's role. But I think tight end 9 is fair. I'm just not going out of my way to get him.
Yeah, because he's a guy where I look at it and I say, if he's finishing higher, if he's beating this ADP, it's probably more so because something went wrong with one of those top 8 guys than Freiermuth, doing something that different from a season ago. I think, he had the big jump from year 1 to year 2. I think that's kind of where he's going to land closer to, last year's numbers underlying wise, but it's not going to be a big pass heavy team. Pickens could make a pretty big jump in terms of his production, and that something like that could take away from Freiermuth, because Freiermuth, he was the number 2 target, but with the way wide receivers are kind of making these jumps year 1 to year 2, it could be a lot closer this year in terms of how the targets break down. Now, tight end 10 is a guy we both love. He's a guy that I've been trying to get on all my teams. His cost is coming up, so hopefully you guys heard me all off season talking about this guy. But Chig Okonkwo entering year 2, I just love the player. Just so explosive. One of those guys that he doesn't get talked about in that talent range with some of those guys higher on the list. But I think if anyone does have the upside to be talked about like that in a couple of years, maybe even as soon as this year, it's him. 20 targeted on 26% of his routes. 2.6 yards per route run, only played on a third of the snap. So just a massive room to grow for him in terms of, what we've seen out of him, the talent. So what do you think of him? He's up to tight end 10 now. So, his price is going up.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a damn shame, that his ADP continues to climb. The market is very sharp when it comes to Chig this year. I think when we started talking about him, he was tight end 18, 16.
Yeah, he was in that 15, 16, then he kind of inched up to right outside the top 12, and now he's inside it.
I mean, he should be a top 10 tight end. So now that he's tight end 10, that's a fair price, but he still has a ton of upside. He came on late in his rookie season, and the only thing really holding him back was playing time. The only stretch where he saw, routes run rate over 50% was weeks 13 through 15, and he was the tight end 2 over that stretch. So, he saw the 25.5% target rate. And with Austin Hooper gone, his routes run rate, I think, will be in that 60 to 70% range, which is more than enough just based on his underlying metrics to get him in that top 10 range. But, the sky's the limit when it comes to him. The only, I guess, concern I would have, and I don't really know if this is likely, but just where DeAndre Hopkins lands. I know the Titans are still, floating some offers out there. So if he were to land there, it would ding him a bit, but he still would have plenty of upside, even if that were to be the case. So I think tight end 10 is a fair price. It's crazy how sharp the ADP has gotten. Like, the market figured Chig out, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and his upside, I think, does come from the fact that he should be on the field a lot more. I know I've seen, the coaching staff kind of talk about they wanted more guys that weren't going to kind of give away whether it's pass or run. In the past, they've had all these tight ends on the roster, but, they had certain guys that they like for blocking more. Okonkwo, guys like Hooper that they like for receiving more, Swaim that they like for blocking more. Okonkwo, he can do a little bit of both, obviously much better as a receiver, but I think, based on what they got behind him at the position, that he's going to play pretty much, all of the downs. Like, he's going to kind of going to be a full-time player this year. So that there's a lot of upside in that. There's even more upside if there isn't a guy like Hopkins, because now you're talking about Chig with the possibility to be the number 2 or even the number 1 target if he takes a massive jump. So Hopkins is now the favorite. Tennessee is now the favorite to land Hopkins. So that is something to pay attention to. And I think because his price is kind of peaked right now on best ball, I would kind of weigh off him now. And season long, I still like him. I still think he should be absolutely one of the top 12 tight ends drafted. But if you're talking about best ball leagues right now, you've been drafting, or even you're just starting to draft, like the price is probably at closer to its ceiling. And if Hopkins signs, which he's, again, the Tennessee has moved into being the favorite, I think his projection only goes down, and thus his ADP should only go down. So I'm not buying right now. I've bought already. I'm not buying right now. And then once we get clarity on the Hopkins situation, we'll kind of make a determination of exactly where he should end up ADP wise as the season heads into August.
That's probably the best outcome, I think, is Titans sign Hopkins. We get Chig's ADP back outside of the top 15, and then we start reinvesting in him. Because honestly, with Hopkins there, he's going to command plenty of attention from the defense. That could open up Chig even more. Like, Chig's not a guy that necessarily needs 8 catches in a game to hit value. Just a few big plays, and having Hopkins there, that could be even more likely. So yeah, hopefully Hopkins signs there and we can get Chig back outside the top 15.
David Njoku, he's been the guy to take the hit, with Chig going up, Engram moving up. So Njoku's down to tight end 11. What do you think of him? Obviously, Deshaun Watson wasn't quite himself. There was a lot of Jacoby Brissett. Now, the thing I found interesting was that small sample, obviously, but his yards per target was about 9 with Brissett and only about 6 with Deshaun Watson. So Watson was pretty good to. Better with the wide receivers, Cooper and DPJ. He was really good with Njoku. The efficiency wasn't there as much with the yardage. What do you think of him heading into this year?
Yeah, no, I've always liked Njoku, and last year he finally had his career year in terms of targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns per game. So he was the tight end 10 in points per game. We all knew he had top 10 upside once he was the undisputed number 1 tight end, which last year was the first time we could say that. So he ran a route over 80% of the time in 8 of his 14 games he played. So he has, the upside with that kind of usage to go off and be a top 10 tight end. The one concern I do have is just Elijah Moore might eat into his target share a bit. But if Deshaun Watson does return to form this season, then that's the scenario where Njoku could be pushing top 5 upside. So again, if you're bullish on Watson heading into the season, definitely, you want to pair him up with David Njoku. But tight end 11 seems right. I would still lean Chig over him. So I think the ADP just really got sharpened up, and that's right about where I would have it. But if he's sitting there at, tight end 11, he does carry a high ceiling floor combo that I like, but it just got to line up perfectly to get him exactly there. But yeah, I do think he still has that top 10 upside for sure.
Yeah, he's just the guy that, if I'm drafting, I wait on tight end, he falls to me, everyone else taking their tight end, I'm fine. I'm fine with it. I'm not really going out of my way to draft David Njoku this year, though, where, as you mentioned, he could potentially be the 4th, or, and you also have Chubb there. So even, the Chubb has never been a receiving kind of back. But, there's still the potential for Njoku to be the 4th option in this offense if DPJ continues to play well and Moore bounces back from, the debacle that was Zach Wilson on his career over these last couple of years. And then Dalton Schultz, he's the tight end 12. He got about $6 million guaranteed. I do think this Texans offense will be better than it has been. And there's no real true. I know Nico Collins is kind of that guy that we're expecting. But there's some target upside in this offense. It's kind of, you don't know. Is it Woods? Is it, is a young guy like Dell gonna emerge? So is you kind of have Schultz in that 12 range, or is there's kind of other guys that you'd rather have as that last startable, ranked tight end in one tight end leagues?
Yeah, I have Schultz at 12. He's tricky because, I always say he was a stud, for the Cowboys, but he's never been the most athletic or, talented tight end. So I think he did just take advantage of being in a good offense. He had really good chemistry with Dak. And sometimes when you have a tight end like that and they go to a new team, they struggle. So there's a chance Schultz could struggle with the Texans. But like you alluded to, I don't know. The fact that we're saying Nico Collins might be the number 1 target is saying something. It probably will be Schultz. So he could have a very high floor. So I think he has a wide range of outcomes. And, to his credit, last season, he was playing through a painful PCL injury. So, a lot of his stats, you have to consider that he wasn't 100% for much of the season. So I think he's one of those players that should bounce back health-wise this season. So I think that's going to help him a lot. So I have him tight end 12. I don't think he offers as much upside as some of the guys I love just outside the top 12. So it seems like a fair price. Like if he's like a safety in that play, you just want someone safe, but I don't really do that once you get towards tight end 12. So he's not a guy I'm really reaching for. But yeah, he very well could be the top target in this offense, or he could struggle in this scheme. So he's a guy I'm kind of polarized on.
Yeah, I'm not going out of my way to draft him, and he's a guy I'm really probably not going to get much of because I do think he was a product of we talked about Kellen Moore has been running the Cowboys at a super fast pace. Their passing volume has been very high. Guys have been missing time for the Cowboys at wide receiver over the last couple of years. Gallup hasn't been healthy. So a lot of the numbers were kind of a product of the offense. I do think the Texans will be a lot better. I don't necessarily know if Dalton Schultz is going to be, a beneficiary of that just compared to where he's going. So he is tight end 12 barely, but we'll talk about some guys right now that we like that I think you could make just as big of a case for us, and that's why I'm not drafting Schultz. I don't really think the value is there, but give me somebody outside the top 12 that you like that kind of could be an alternative to somebody if they're kind of faced with drafting Schultz.
Well, I'm not going very far outside of the top 12 because my favorite tight end outside of the top 12 is tight end 13 and Greg Dulcich. I have just been super high on Dulcich from day one. He wasn't able to suit up until week 6 of his rookie season. He missed most of training camp, missed the entire preseason as a rookie. So it was just very impressive for him to just hit the ground running as a rookie. So I think he's going to be even better in year 2. Get more chemistry with Russ Wilson. Hopefully, new head coach Sean Payton can, get Russ Wilson to bounce back this year. That's only going to help Dulcich. But, Dulcich was the tight end 10 over, week 16 to week 6 to week 16 when he was a full-time starter. So we've already seen that he has top 10 upside, but I think there's even more. 16 of his 55 targets last year were uncatchable. And it was just maddening watching Broncos games. Just Russ Wilson completely missing Dulcich, wide open over the middle of the field. I felt like Dulcich could have had an even better season. So again, hopefully Sean Payton can repair Russell Wilson. But even if not, we've already seen Dulcich has top 10 upside. So I love, getting Dulcich at tight end 13 still. His tight end, his ADP is creeping up. But again, I really do think he should be closer to the top 10 this year.
Yeah, I love the talent. I'm still a little skeptical just because they have other guys that are going to factor in at the position. So, I do see the floor of he's still more of kind of like a passing game specialist. And Sean Payton and his offenses have been weird with tight ends at time in terms of the total routes. So I do think there's a possibility his routes might go down. His price is going up, but again, in most leagues, you're just taking a flyer on him at this point. If you miss out on those top guys. So I can't really knock it. I think I would rather take Dulcich a little bit later than a guy like Dalton Schultz. So I can't really knock it there. But my guy is Tyler Higbee, who's a couple spots lower, usually around tight end 16. I know Cooper Kupp is coming back, but I still think there's a chance Tyler Higbee could be the number 2 target in this offense because Van Jefferson is more of a downfield, lower percentage route runner kind of player. Higbee was targeted on 24% of his routes last season, which is very, very good. That's on par with guys like Mark Andrews, with guys like Hockenson. So I do think there's some upside here because the Rams defense is not going to be as good, in my opinion, as it's been in years past with the mass exodus of talent that they were kind of forced to deal with due to the cap situation. So Higbee put up about 4.5 catches, over 7 targets in Stafford's 9 starts last year, most of which Kupp was there for. So I do like Higbee as a sneaky option, just hanging around in that mid, tight end 15-ish range. I like Higbee a lot to sneak into the top 12 as well.
Oh yeah, no, I love Tyler Higbee. I still think he's being slept on. He's always a value, but I think this year he really is. And a lot of that is just, he's probably going to be the number 2 target. And really the wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3 slots for the Rams has been deteriorating over the past several seasons. So the days of Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Woods are over. Now we have Cooper Kupp, Van Jefferson, and like Ben Skoranek. So I think that only helps Higbee, and his target share is going to go up this year. So Yeah, I think he's definitely getting sleeped on. I have him as my tight end 13 right now. Actually, I'm super high on him as well.
Yeah, he's my tight end 13 too. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm in on some Tyler Higbee. It's not sexy.
Right.
But
Get
yeah,
the
he's
job
there.
done. You're just, you're drafting the tight end late. So yeah, no, he's always been like one of my favorite high end tight end twos.
And then I'll close it up by I know there's rookies. There's a couple of rookies that are kind of going. They're outside the top 12, but I think people, especially in basketball, are going to be considering them. I know you like Laporta a lot, and you like Kincaid as well. And which one of those guys do you think provides more value? The Laporta is going tight end 22, and Kincaid is tight end 15. It looks like at the moment.
Yeah, no, obviously, Kincaid has top 15 upside. I think he's being drafted right about where he should be. I have him as my tight end 16, but I do think Laporta specifically is going a bit low at tight end 22, just because he really could be the number 2 target in the Lions offense, especially in the first 6 game when Jameson's out. And honestly, once Jameson's back, Laporta still could be the number 2 target in this offense. So they really, they needed somebody to replace TJ Hockenson. Laporta already replaced Hockenson once at Iowa, once Hockenson declared for the draft. So I think Laporta is going to fill in right away here. And I think Laporta has a ton of upside. He should be able to be one of those rookies early on, like a Greg Dulcich. Like, he does give me those kind of vibes. So I think where he's going, I think Laporta at tight end 22 definitely has the most value.
Yeah, I think he's on the upswing, and I think guys like Gerald Everett, Juwan Johnson even might Dawson Knox. I think guys like that are going to struggle to hit their ADP. So some of these guys, Laporta, Kincaid, you're going to see there a little closer to the top 12 than you might think, because I think some of those other guys are being a little bit overdrafted.
Where are you ranking Kincaid right now?
I believe I have them right in that same range, like 15, 16. I do think the Bills are going to play a lot more two tight end kind of sets in
with Kincaid lined up more as a slot receiver.
Exactly, because
right?
they want to make defenses kind of declare, are you going to leave a nickel on the field or what? So I think Kincaid, and at the same time, it's still iffy. We still, the Bills wanted to do that last year, and they didn't really get to do it as much. So he could be a year away from true fantasy relevance, but always taking a shot on talent, especially on a team like the Bills with a good offense. I don't mind it, but I think Laporta definitely is the better value among the rookies because it's kind of a mix of, okay, he has the opportunity, he has the talent, the ADP is not too high, and then with Kincaid, the ADP might be a little high. With guys like Luke Musgraves, who could start. There's just a lot of uncertainty because you got the quarterback situation. You also got another tight end in Kraft. Same thing for a guy like Schoonmaker in Dallas. Like, there's just not as much guaranteed as far as the role. So I think Laporta is kind of that sweet spot among these rookies. All right, that is going to wrap it up for our tight end episode. Our running back 1 and 2 episodes are already out. We'll drop our wide receiver 1 episode later this week next, and then we'll keep going with wide receiver after that. You can find Sean on Twitter at @the_oddsmaker, me at Chris Raybon. We're at those same handles on the free award-winning Action Network app, and be sure to check our 2023 fantasy rankings on actionnetwork.com. Those are live right now. Until next time, let's get this money.